Judith Maria and welcome to SC Global News. From St. Dunstan's Church in Canterbury's initiative to exhume and enshrine the skull of St. Thomas More to the diplomatic visit of the Vatican's Secretary for Relations with States and International Organizations to India, we have many stories to cover. Preparations are in progress to exhume and enshrine the skull of St. Thomas More in time for the 500th anniversary of his execution. More, a Catholic martyr executed in 1535 for rejecting King Henry VIII's separation from the Roman Church, has had his head interred at St. Dunstan's Church in Canterbury since 1578 in the Roper family vault. The church now plans to preserve the relic and eventually place it on display in a dedicated shrine. St. Dunstan's Church in Canterbury has announced a historic plan to exhume and preserve the remains of St. Thomas More, a prominent Catholic martyr executed nearly 5 centuries ago. The Church of England parish hopes to have the relics conserved and eventually displayed in a new shrine ahead of the 500th anniversary of More's death in 2035. The proposed project marks a significant moment for the quiet Kent Church, which may soon become a destination for pilgrims and historians alike. More, a renowned lawyer, author, and statesman, was executed in 1535 under the reign of King Henry VIII for refusing to acknowledge the monarch as the head of Church of England. Following his beheading at Tower Hill, his body was interred within the Tower of London. His head, however, was famously rescued by his daughter, Margaret Roper, who preserved it and later had it buried with her. In 1578, the remains of Margaret Roper and her father's skull was relocated to the Roper family vault within St. Dunstan's Church, where they have remained ever since. Now the church is seeking permission to recover the relic and preserve it using contemporary conservation methods. A statement shared with parishioners during a recent Sunday service confirmed that the Parochial Church Council has given conditional approval to move forward, pending authorization from the ecclesiastical authorities. As reported by The Times, the statement read, quote, "What the PCC has agreed, subject to all rights permissions being granted, is to exhume and conserve what remains of the relic, which will take several years to dry out and stabilize." End quote. The church is considering to display the relic either in a specially designed reliquary within the Roper Chapel or returning it to the crypt in a more secure and accessible form. The church estimates that the conservation effort could cost upwards of £50,000 and is appealing for the community support and donations. In addition, clergy are inviting feedback from public on how best to commemorate More's legacy. However, the current condition of the skull remains uncertain. The vault where it was kept was accidentally opened in 1835 during building work and again in 1997 when the remains were transferred to a secure niche in the vault wall. On both occasions, the lead container holding the skull was found broken, with bones inside visibly fragmented. Since then, the relic has not been publicly seen. Reverend Joe Richards, rector of the local benefice, noted that the interest from the visitors in viewing the relic has grown over the years and the initial reaction from the congregation have been largely supportive. While exhumations from consecrated ground are rare and require approval from church courts, supporters of the project argue that More's global significance as a saint, intellectual, and moral figure lends weight to the request. Canonized by Catholic Church in 1935, Thomas More is remembered for his steadfast faith and principled stand against royal authority. Supporters of the initiative at St. Dunstan's see the conservation of his relic as an opportunity to educate and inspire future generations while honoring life marked by intellectual brilliance and spiritual conviction. An Iranian Christian convert, Mehran Shamloi, who had fled a 10-year prison sentence for involvement in a house church, was deported from Turkey and immediately detained upon his return to Iran. He had left Iran earlier this year and was attempting to reach Europe when he was apprehended by Turkish authorities in Istanbul for traveling without valid documentation. He was deported to Mashhad in northeastern Iran, where security forces arrested him upon arrival. An Iranian Christian who fled after being sentenced to 10 years in prison for being part of a house church has been detained after being deported back to Iran from Turkey. Mehran Shamloi, along with two others, were collectively sentenced by the Iranian Revolutionary Court to a combined total of over 40 years in prison for charges described as propaganda activities contrary to Islamic law. Shamloi was arrested by Turkish authorities in Istanbul while attempting to leave to Europe without valid travel documents and without applying for refugee status in Turkey. According to Middle Eastern Concern, he was deported to Mashhad in northeastern Iran, where he was taken in custody by Iranian security forces on arrival. Shamloi was arrested in November 2024 along with two other converts, Abbas Suri and Nargis Nasri. The three were held in Ward 209 of Tehran's Evin prison, a facility controlled by the Ministry of Intelligence, and interrogated extensively before being released on bail of over $20,000 each in December 2024. The trial took place in February, charging the three under Articles 499, 500 and 500 bis of Iran's Islamic Penal Code. Shamloi has been sentenced to 10 years and 8 months in prison, comprising 8 years for propaganda activities and 32 months for house church membership, and was fined $2,750. Abbas Suri received a 15-year prison sentence, 10 years for propaganda activities and 5 years for house church involvement. Nargis Nasri, who was pregnant with her first child, has been sentenced to 16 years in prison on charges of engaging in propaganda activities contrary to Islamic law, practicing in house church gatherings, and making social media posts in support of the Women Life Freedom Movement. In addition to these sentences, both Nasri and Suri have been fined, banned from any group membership, and prohibited from residing in Tehran or leaving Iran for 2 years after the release. On April 23rd, the 36th branch of the Tehran Appeals Court dismissed the defendants' appeal, citing the extent of their activities and their detrimental impact as justification for upholding the original verdicts. They were officially informed on April 26 that they had 5 days to report to Evin prison to begin serving their sentences. However, according to Barnabas' aide, all three had already left Iran by that time. After being deported from Turkey, it remains unclear whether Shamloi will serve his sentence at Evin prison. The facility sustained damage in an Israeli airstrike on June 23rd, prompting the relocation of many inmates to other prisons. On Monday, July 14, the heads of Christian churches of the Holy Land, joined by ambassadors and councils, visited Taiwan to show their solidarity and support for its residents and clergy. For weeks, the community has endured aggressive assaults by hundreds of Israeli settlers attempting to forcibly take over their homes and land.
The Council of Patriarchs and Heads of Churches of Jerusalem visited Taipei, the last entirely Christian town in the West Bank, on July the 14th in solidarity with the local community facing rising targeted attacks. In a joint statement, the church leaders asked for prayers, attention, and action, particularly from Christians around the globe. The leaders mentioned the July 7 arson attack carried out on the town cemetery and the 5th century church of St. Gregory, terming them a direct and intentional threat not only to the local community but also to the historic and religious heritage of the land. The Greek Orthodox, Latin, and Malankite Greek Catholic leaders joined with the local priests in issuing a clear plea for support in the face of frequent systematic attacks and harassment by Israeli radicals, declaring that the church has had a presence in the region for nearly 2,000 years. They firmly rejected the message of exclusion sent out by the rebels. The bishops asserted, even in times of war, sacred places must be protected. The leaders concluded their statement asking diplomats, politicians, and church officials worldwide to provide a prayerful and outspoken voice for the ecumenical community in Taipei, that they may live in peace and security.
St. Anne's Catholic School in Olmutz, a defunct Catholic school in Barton County, has been severely vandalized, prompting a criminal investigation by the sheriff's office. Hateful symbols, offensive graffiti, overturned furniture, and broken equipment were found throughout the building. Authorities believe at least 3 individuals were involved in the break-in, which occurred sometime between June 28th and July 7th. However, the damage was not reported to law enforcement until July 10th.
A defunct Catholic school building in Barton County, Kansas, was extensively damaged by vandals. The incident was reported to the police on July the 10th. St. Anne's Catholic School in Olmutz, which served as a venue for religious education and other parish activities, was broken into by unknown persons. According to a news report by KWCH, several statues and furniture have been broken and hate messages and images drawn on chalkboards. The Barton County Sheriff's Office informed that 3 people vandalized the school between June the 27th and July the 7th. Sheriff Brian Belinda told KWCH that they were investigating the incident as a hate crime due to the anti-Semitic, the homophobic, the anti-religious graffiti. St. Anne's Parochial School began operating in 1903. The school and the parish church were rebuilt in 1913 after a fire burned them down. The school was shut down in 1976 due to a shortage of teaching sisters. Confraternity of Christian Doctrine and Catholic Youth Organization classes are still held at St. Anne's School every Sunday.
China is tightening control over Christian communities amid rising economic unrest. The government is arresting pastors, expelling missionaries, and installing facial recognition cameras in churches. Worship is being monitored and restricted under the new communist policies. Here is a detailed report from China's underground church reality.
A new wave of Christian persecution is unfolding in China as the government steps up to its control over religious communities through increased surveillance. According to CBN News, growing economic instability and public dissent are prompting the Chinese Communist Party to impose stricter measures on places of worship. Jeff King, president of International Christian Concern, stated that mass protests are emerging, particularly among students. He stated that amid hardship, while many demand democracy, numerous citizens are shifting their hopes from political reform to spiritual faith. On May the 1st, the government introduced tighter restrictions on foreign missionaries, and officials now rarely approve requests for preaching. Bob Few, founder of China Aid, told CBN News that authorities forced many preachers, posing as professionals, to leave. In government-approved churches, nationalistic hymns must now precede Christian worship. Few revealed that criminalizing church offerings and arresting house church pastors had become routine under the crackdown. He reported that officials are mandating facial recognition cameras in church interiors, including the pulpit. Despite persecution, Christianity is reportedly growing. China Aid documented new church plants in 2024, and revival is spreading in house churches, some led by imprisoned pastors. Gary Lane of CBN News concluded that persecution is fueling spiritual resilience among Chinese Christians.
Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher, the Vatican's Secretary of Relations with State and International Organizations, has commenced his visit to India. A post from the Holy See Secretariat of State on its official X account announced that the Archbishop arrived in India on Sunday, July 13th and will remain in the country until Saturday, July 19th.
Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher, the top diplomat from the Vatican and Secretary for Relations with States, has been in India on a week-long official visit since July the 13th, aimed at strengthening diplomatic ties and engaging in dialogue with both government and church leaders, according to Vatican News. Observers view the trip as a significant milestone in Vatican-India relations, with the Church seeking to deepen cooperation and mutual understanding. India is home to over 23 million Catholics, primarily organized into three rites: Latin, Syro-Malabar, and Syro-Malankara, within a nation that is predominantly Hindu. Despite being a religious minority, Catholics contribute significantly to the field of education, healthcare, and charitable services of the country, according to Herald Malaysia. Vatican sources expect meeting between the envoy and the Indian political and religious leaders to focus on interfaith dialogue, rights issues, and social cooperation. Analysts believe the mission led by Gallagher may mark a broader Vatican outreach in Asia, driven by the growing global influence of India. His diplomatic background equips him to navigate sensitive topics like religious liberty, minority protections, and international peace efforts.
That's all for today. Until we meet again, God bless and thank you.